Hello and welcome back. It's me again, and today we're continuing the discussion on trial by jury, and we're talking about the advantages and disadvantages of juries today. So let's get right back into it. Today's challenge is beans. So yeah, I have 99 bombs, and the butt bombs and the bean, and it's extra beanie powerful. Let me use this to get them confused. Good enough. I don't care. So, let me preface this whole discussion by saying that some people argue that the guilt plea system, plus the high costs of trials themselves, end up coercing a lot of defendants to relinquish their rights to a trial by jury. Others argue that even before... I almost walked into that, didn't I? Whoa! That's fantastic. And a Hierophant? And a tinted rock? Wow. Wow. Okay, let me find the secret room. I think I know where it is. What a very powerful start. Anyway, yes, so some people argue that trial by jury, people end up coercing others into removing their right or relinquishing their right to a trial by jury. Others argue that even before the popularity of plea bargaining, which only really became popular in like the past, I don't know, 50 years-ish, that juries were, quote here, I'm not sure who this quote is from, but someone is quoted as saying that juries were unwitting and reflexive, generally wasteful of public resources, and because of the absence of trained professionals, little more than slow guilt pleas themselves. So let's get into the advantages of juries. And as a reminder, almost all judicial systems in the world do incorporate juries in some form. Just in common law systems, they tend to be important, and in civil law systems, they're not very important. So even if you hate trial by jury and don't see the point, it is still probably practiced somewhere in your legal system. Advantages. The thoroughness of jury trials have been praised for providing the public with important information that is often not released in alternative procedures like arbitration or adjudication by judges or administrative agencies. That's a lot of words. But basically, the public is more involved in a jury trial, which can be really good for clarity and information. Nice. I don't see a point to devil deals. I don't think I even have any unlocked that would aid bombs here. Research provides partial support for the proficiency of juries as decision makers. I'm not sure what research, but you can go to Wikipedia to see it yourself, I guess, to see the references that they use, at least. Which is what you generally should do if you're ever curious about some of my topics or conclusions, because I generally take excerpts from Wikipedia. I do not simply read off of Wikipedia straight. What I do here is a little more involved than that. I would really like that. No. But generally, unless I'm listing a specific source of mine, you can assume that it comes from Wikipedia somehow, somewhere. So feel free to go look it up. 2 puberties? Okay, that's fine. And a pheromones. Okay, just 1 more penny. Ugh, great. Ah, I missed one. Oh, not even a penny. I could... I have enough health. I could start sacrificing some, you know? And there it is! I almost missed it. Too gassy. Let's see. This is gonna be huge for me. That's a bomb. Between bench trials, in which several judges hear the case, not juries. Ow. Between bench trials and jury trials, as it was researched in the year 1966, so maybe this info is a bit outdated, I don't know. It was found that jury trials and bench trials tend to agree 80% of the time. They make the same verdict for the same decision, for the same reasons. So that's really good. It's, you know, comforting to see that juries aren't completely subjective and that they usually agree with what judges would decide anyway. I mean, maybe that isn't surprising, but it is comforting. Okay, get you out of here. Does this guy even... Oh, he does swallow bombs. Cool. I forgot. Yeah. More food. Suja A. Thomas, a professor of law at the University of Illinois. Illinois. That was a lot of soul hearts. Nah, it's only Mom's foot. Writes that, although results between judges and juries may be similar, judges and juries can disagree. If a choice must be made between a judge or a jury deciding, the diversity, availability of deliberations, the requirement for consensus, the lack of monetary or promotion incentives, and the fresh examination of evidence all make the jury the most attractive, least biased decision maker. That's a pretty glowing review of juries, I'd say. And lastly, I want to mention, as far as advantages of juries go... Nice. I guess I'll keep that. That Robert P. Burns, a professor at the Northwest University of School of Law, Northwest University's School of Law, I guess to be more accurate about that, writes that juries are less influenced by interest groups and partisan politics, which is true. That's not simply an opinion, although I don't have research on hand to cite either. But now let's talk about the disadvantages. So as was mentioned before, the time and the cost of a jury trial can be much more than bench trials. Get out of here. Get. Okay. So that's an obvious deterrent, unfortunately, at least in the American judicial system, which is what I am largely talking about, like it or not. 15, nice. What do I get? I get nothing. That's not interesting to me. Jurors also have their cognitive biases. Of course. Every single person has their own cognitive biases. But does that make or break a jury trial? Well, the answer is a little nuanced. A lot of cards. None of those really matter. You work for me, right? Yeah, you do. Money time. I'm not even sure what, if, or how the tarot cloth actually benefits that, but whatever. So again, jurors have cognitive biases. Every single person has their own cognitive biases. But here's the weird, unintuitive thing about cognitive diversity is that groups of people actually largely, but not entirely, end up canceling out individual cognitive biases. Unintuitive, but true. Well studied. However, there are some exceptions. First of all, if the cognitive bias is shared by a significant number of... Let me use that guy. If the cognitive bias is shared by a significant number of individuals, then obviously, collectively, it no longer cancels out. For example, in jury trials, if the defendant, especially in criminal cases, if the defendant does not adhere to social norms or common standards of success, then those can be negatively biased in the minds, or that person can be negatively biased in the minds of the jurors, because that's something that most people, not everyone, but most people might not approve of or appreciate, or might look down on. Even if it's only very slight and completely unintentional, it is worth pointing out. Card.
2 of spades.
And Pokego. Pokego. Oh. Yeah, good enough. There's no harm in checking or in savings. So, again, cognitive biases generally cancel out unless they are shared by everyone involved, or most people involved. Also, availability bias absolutely plays a role here, that jurors are people, or even not just jurors, but anyone trying to make a decision is ultimately just a person, and are more likely to be influenced by more recent or more readily available information rather than all information. But that's just a very human feature, and that one is difficult to get rid of. But the biggest challenge to the fairness of trial by jury is the fact that that property of cognitive bias, to cancel out, generally, disappears when you allow people to talk to each other. Yeah, that's kind of really bad for, trial by jury and everything. Actually, I can use you. Oh. And you. And then I'll take you for the insta-kill. So, yeah, when you allow people to talk to each other, some biases can actually grow in strength, and generally just more charismatic people can make their opinions a lot more respected by the rest of the jury. Right, I don't have the bean anymore. I forgot. Maybe I should have gone back for the bean. Oh well. Allowing people to communicate with each other can lead to mob mentality or group think. Not good, not good. Jurors themselves can also certainly be subject to the persuasive and charismatic methods of the attorneys involved, being more influenced by their charisma than by the evidence, theory, or expert opinions that are relevant to the case. So that's no good. And lastly, I want to mention juror selection. I can't really see well, but okay. Juror selection in the US is kind of yikes, I'll be honest. Bye-bye. Dark bum. Sure, yeah, I'll take that. Burnt penny. So, juror selection in the US involves the attorneys, one or both of them, usually both of them, questioning potential jurors, and then both sides, the plaintiff or prosecution, depending whether it's civil or criminal, and the defense attorneys then eliminate which potential jurors they want from the panel until the number of remaining jurors is enough to form an actual jury bench. I don't think that's the technical term. But they'll just mutually eliminate people until they get only the people they want. And they'll ask all kinds of questions, or maybe ask very few questions. I don't know. It depends on the attorneys, depends on the case. They try to keep questions relevant to the trial. But, yeah, there are problems with that system. Namely that if they don't have enough jurors at the end, they'll just keep bringing in more potential jurors until they eventually stop eliminating enough and are able to agree on some number. That number is generally 14 because there are 12 jurors and 2 alternatives, 2 replacements, substitutes, whatever you want to call them. But they aren't told which 2 are the replacements. That way, all 14 of them are attentive. But just in case 1 or 2 of them need to drop out, you have the substitutes for when it comes time for the actual deliberation. So there is absolutely bias in juror selection, and in fact, it is commonly known and commonly used by attorneys. For example, in SA trials, men are pretty likely to come in with a preconceived guilty verdict, whereas women are more likely to come in with a preconceived not guilty verdict, which is a little weird, a little unintuitive to me, but it played out in the trial that I was a part of, which was an SA trial, talking with the jurors after the fact. Although we all agreed there was a lack of substantial evidence in the case, I and the several other men in the jury that I was a part of felt we were leaning towards a more guilty verdict. However, the majority of the jurors in that trial were women, and they pretty confidently felt like not guilty was going to be their verdict. Ultimately, we needed more evidence, though, and we noted down a question that we would have loved either the prosecution or the defense to ask, which would have really shed light on the trial. I'm, of course, not going into depth as to what that trial was for the sake of privacy and all that, even though the trial was declared a mistrial in the end. But yeah, so attorneys will try to eliminate people in order to try to stack the jury in their statistical favor. This is common, in fact. So yeah, that's kind of an issue when you want a fair trial of your peers. The whole system is a little bit rigged. And finally, jurors themselves may lack privacy, as prosecutors, defense attorneys, and even news media are legally allowed to investigate jurors. And when you're asked a bunch of questions, when you're first being sort of interviewed to determine whether you want to be, or whether the attorneys think you should be part of the jury, they may ask some very personal and private information, and then it's ultimately up to the discretion of the judge whether that information should be stricken from the record. And if it's not, then it's public, or potentially public, although most cases aren't that big enough to blow up and be covered by the news. But it could potentially be. So what's the solution here? I don't know. If there was an easy solution, we'd probably have come to it. But I think a good start would be this. Don't allow the jurors to speak to each other at all until the trial is over and the deliberation begins. But before they speak, but after the trial, so right before they start deliberating, they should each write down a list of what they think the verdict should be and their reasonings for it, and then discuss it. See, the complication here is that discussing trials ends up removing the benefits of the cognitive biases, but at the same time, discussion allows the understanding of key pieces of evidence to be spread to all members rather than just being held by one or two, and then for whatever reason, it's not as clear to maybe the rest of the jury. So allowing them to communicate can clarify a lot of those points, but it also removes cognitive bias. So maybe write down your initial opinions on the case first, then deliberate, and then weigh the two against each other in the end. But that'll do it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope you participate in your juries if you're ever asked to. So I'll see you tomorrow, unless you have jury duty. I mean, I guess you could still watch on like your phone or something. Take care.